I first met Lee Bechtel, Lee B as I called him, in May of 1990, 24 years ago this last month. I know that because that was the month I gave up my law practice in Rochester and went into politics full time. They gave me a Senate race and a title, Deputy Campaign Manager. Well, the race was just about right. If our odds had been any better, they never would have given it to me. And if our odds were any worse, I wouldn't have taken the job. We were running against a guy you probably have heard of, Joe Biden. And so, on Memorial Day weekend of 1990, I found myself driving to Wilmington, Delaware. My wife Sally took care of shutting down the law practice and selling our house. That woman was a saint. Me, I wound up in a boarding house in Wilmington, explaining to everybody I met why I would give up a law practice of 11 years to take on a dead-bang loser of a campaign for the Senate in Delaware against Joe Biden. Well, a few days in, I got a call from our oppo guy, opposition researcher, a guy named Lee Bechtel. A friendly voice on the phone. And he took me in and he educated me on his research. It was formidable. Votes and quotes, donations and the votes that were tied to them, missteps and gaffes, big and small. Back then, Joe Biden was best known for plagiarizing his stump speech. That's what caused him to withdraw from his presidential campaign in 1988. I asked Lee if he happened to have the transcripts of those. Not only did he have the transcripts, Lee had the videotapes of Neil Kinnock, the British Labour leader, and of Joe Biden copying his speech. That's how good his research was. By the end of the call, and it went on for over an hour, I knew what Joe Biden had for breakfast that morning. And something else happened too. I found a soulmate. Instant friends with a guy who loved politics as much as I do. He understood intuitively why I would give up a law practice to take on a Senate race. Because it was a Senate race. Lee B didn't just love politics. He was like me. It coursed through his blood. We breathed it. Well, Lee's introduction to national politics was a lot more conventional than my own. An Indiana boy, he graduated college and went to work as an intern for his home state senator, Richard Lugar. Well, like all congressional interns in those days, Lee had plenty of time for mischief, and he got into it. But one of those interns brought his own car to Washington. A big mistake. The car happened to be an obnoxious shade of yellow. And one of the interns stole the guy's car keys, and another one stole the car. They drove it to a Mako, where that obnoxious yellow car became an even more obnoxious purple car that the intern spent almost a day trying to find before he almost reported it stolen. Well, despite the commission of at least 2 major felonies, Lee was the rare intern who got a job in Congress. He started at the bottom and he worked his way up. He rose to the title of administrative assistant. Today that's called chief of staff. That brilliant mind of his displayed a penchant for research, and he went on to become director of opposition research for the National Republican Senatorial Committee, doing races from coast to coast. It's a job that wins elections, that peels the campaign ads that you see in November. Most people have never heard of opposition researchers, and that you never see them on cable news networks or quoted in the newspapers. That's because it's done by people who are invisible. who crave anonymity. People like Lee B, who never ever bragged of his accomplishments, who never sought the limelight. You probably didn't know it, but Lee B is the man who convinced an Indiana radio talk show host to run for Congress. The guy lost, but Lee went back at him and convinced him to run a second time. Do you have any idea how hard it is to convince somebody to put their life on hold and go to all their friends and try to run a second time for Congress after they've lost? But Lee was persistent, and he was nothing if he wasn't persuasive. And his optimism shone through, and the guy did run. And he won. His name was Mike Pence. And our friend Lee B had his brush with history. After Indiana politics and opposition research, he became a lobbyist. They even elected him head of the League of Lobbyists in Washington. I knew Lee during those years. We dined together a lot at dinner. And he and Deb would invite me and Sally up to the cove where we went sailing and drank a lot, drank way too much. We'd talk politics late into the night, the upper capillaries of how to win an election. But he never bragged about the work he did, especially the work he did for his lead client, the nation's oncologists. God only knows the cancer patients that Lee B wound up helping through his work for the cancer doctors. But Lee was not able to do anything about another disease, juvenile diabetes. It plagued him his whole life. And a few years ago, Lee underwent a diabetic coma, and that brilliant mind of his was devastated. He and Deb came to visit me on Amelia Island, and despite the impairment, there was still Lee B there, optimistic, cheerful, happy to be alive. Deb tells me he even used to go dancing and sailing. That was Lee. But after they left, I cried like a baby. He was lucky in many things, but in nothing so lucky as with Deb. She was gentle, caring, showed all the love a man could ask for. But Lee has gone to a better place now, a place where his mind is just as strong as it ever was. And I know Lee makes friends easily, so I imagine he's having really good political conversations with people like LBJ and Kennedy and Nixon and Reagan. And old friends like his old boss, Richard Lugar. Maybe now he can finally explain what he did to that guy's car. Lee, I love you. I wish I could be there for you. God bless you. Rest well, my friend, and we'll see you on the other side.